Welcome to On the Business, the podcast for professional service businesses. Presented by Accelo.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us. My name is Hamra Black, and I'm the VP of Client Success here at Accelo. I'm really excited to be hosting the first episode of On the Business. Throughout the series, we'll be highlighting what it takes to run a successful service business. Within each episode, you can expect to hear practical advice and insights for focusing your time and effort on the business rather than in it. We'll also be joined by industry leaders from service businesses around the world as we discuss what it takes to build a great business that doesn't depend on you to constantly be in it. Joining us today is Geoff McQueen, Accelo CEO and Co-Founder, who'll be sharing practical advice and insights on how business owners can free up time and ensure that the time they spend working on the business translates to improvements that stick. Geoff's prior experience running a digital agency, combined with his experience in supporting the growth and continued success of thousands of professional service businesses through Accelo, makes for a high-value session to kick off the series. Let's get started. Geoff, over to you.
Thanks so much for that, Hamra, and so thrilled to have so many people join us for our first episode of the On the Business series. For the last 20 years, I've been both a business owner and an advisor to lots and lots of other businesses. And what I've learned from working with so many thousands of other businesses and their managers is that while there's a lot of great sources of advice for doing tactical things in the business, like hiring great people, getting more leads, there's often a shortage of advice that's focused on the needs of the business as a whole. It's more task and skill-based rather than looking at the bigger picture for the business. Now, running a business is hard and often lonely. And I hope with this series is that we'll be able to share some practical, useful, and above all, helpful advice for the many unsung heroes of our communities, the people who take the big chance and put it all on the line to build prosperity for their clients, their employees, and themselves by going into business and creating something from nothing. This is the first of an ongoing series, and as always, feedback and suggestions are really welcome. So if you've got some suggestions or feedback, please feel free to email info@accelo.com, and I'd love to hear them so we can make this series as successful as possible for so many people out there running successful service businesses. May you live in interesting times. Now, this is a curse and not a compliment. And I think it sums up well what I think about when I reflect on the year 2020. It started pretty rough for those who recall before COVID was a thing. Some of the big news around the world, and certainly where I'm from in Australia and where I was at the time when these fires really took off, was some pretty record-breaking wildfires, or bushfires as we call them. They burned through an area 1.5 times the size of England and led to dozens of deaths of people and an incredible toll amongst the wildlife. But that became something which, then all of us changed our attention and our focus with the really onset of COVID-19. And from the middle of March onwards, as it really exploded across the Western world in particular and the wider world outside of its emergence, it's now, killed more than 1.4 million people. And the toll now is up over 250,000 folks in the US alone. And as we record this episode, the reality is that it's accelerating around much of the world still. So it's been a tough year and it's not showing any signs of letting up. In addition to those natural disasters and the virus, there's also been a lot of social unrest and a divisive election, which has even led to, at the time of recording this episode, the loser of the election in the US still not conceding. And so the implications of that for how people feel, their level of confidence, their level of optimism, obviously have all collectively had a massive hit to the world economy. And while lots of businesses are doing it tough, and we all see the data and the statistics about unemployment rates, it's worth taking a moment to recognize just how hard small businesses are doing. Small businesses, per The Economist in early November, said that small businesses have been crushed by the pandemic and the economic impacts of the pandemic. the small and medium businesses that make up the Russell 2000 share index are 4 times as likely to be losing money this year than big firms. And what's also quite incredible is that, almost half of small and medium business CEOs think they'll run out of cash in the next 6 months. Now, that Russell 2000 index you can see on the chart there is actually listed companies. And the really small companies that aren't listed are even more likely to be in dire straits as a result of the pandemic. And so it's no wonder that many people running small businesses have felt like they've been crouched in a defensive position all year, just trying to survive the repeated blows and waiting out this horrible situation. But fortunately, things look a lot better for 2021. As we record this episode, there have now been 3 different coronavirus vaccines that have released their trial results, 2 of which have now been put forward to the authorities for approval for distribution, and a high likelihood that there'll be lots and lots and lots of people in frontline medical areas that are definitely the most at risk, treating other people, that they can get vaccinated by the holidays, by Christmas, and with a very positive picture taking shape early in the new year. In addition to the medical side of things, there's also a lot of fiscal stimulus in our economies as governments recognize the importance of really being able to stimulate growth and to get people to make up for lost time. And that's not just from an economic point of view. There's also a human factor too. My brother was expecting to get married earlier this year, and that didn't happen. And he's not alone. There's going to be lots and lots and lots of people who have really got time to make up for from a lost 2020. And my hunch is that that's going to set the stage for a really, really fast growth year in 2021. What's probably going to be the largest boom of our lifetimes to make up for this incredibly record-setting contraction, also the largest in our lifetimes from an economic point of view caused by the onset of the pandemic. And while small businesses have been hit the hardest, they're also likely to bounce back the fastest. Recessions can actually be great times to start a business or to refocus an existing one. Incumbents, often with higher costs, less agility, and more debt, are washed away in difficult times. And a bit like a forest after a fire or a rainforest after a tree falls, you've got more sunlight and space for saplings to grow and emerge. What's interesting is that the data bears this out, even in this most strange of years, with more than 80,000 small businesses having been started in 2020. That's an increase of over 30% on what was pretty much a booming 2019, and almost 2 times the growth that we saw in 2009, the last time there was a difficult period like this, admittedly for different reasons. So small businesses are already preparing for the boom, both by forming as well as by organizing themselves. Now, with the US going through its 3rd wave and Europe on a second round of major lockdowns, you might be thinking now's a strange time to be looking forward with confidence. But the truth is, while the next few months are going to be difficult, if you wait until the day of the big race to start getting into shape, you're going to place pretty poorly. You might even injure yourself having gotten off the couch and trying to run a big race. And that's why now is the time to get out of that defensive crouch and start to take control again. So you can be ready to ride what is likely to be the biggest recovery from an economic point of view of our lifetimes. The good news is that getting in shape physically, the good news is, like getting in shape physically, taking control again of your business is less about investing money and more about investing time. So you might be thinking, okay, but how? How do I take control again? How do I get out of this defensive crouch when, I'm still looking at a light order book and the next few months are going to be challenging? And the answer is you invest that time and not so much of that money in taking control by focusing on and not in the business. Many folks will be familiar with the book called The E-Myth. It was first published in 1986 and updated in 2004. And Michael Gerber, the author, really created a phenomenon with this book. It is still to this day, more than 35 years after it was published, one of the top 20 business books sold today. Michael's insight, formed after almost a decade of working with small business owners and refined over the next 30 years, was that Most small businesses aren't working because they were founded by somebody who's great at doing what they do, the technician, and that the myth is that this technician who's great at being an architect or an accountant or an engineer or a designer is able to then apply themselves through hard work and sheer force of will to create an incredible business. And Michael's key insight is that there's actually two other personalities required to build the business, in addition to that technician who's often the spark or the initiation for starting a small business. Those other personalities are the entrepreneur and the manager. And it only by getting out of the technical or in the business work, producing whatever it is that the business produces an output, and instead focusing on the business, can a small business owner go from truly having a job to owning a business. Now, I'm a serial entrepreneur for the last 20 years, and I can really attest to the wisdom that I've experienced, seen, and put into practice from the E-Myth. And I've certainly seen firsthand, not only in my own businesses, but also in the businesses that I've helped, how being able to focus on the business has transformed the nature of those businesses and the lives of the people who work in them and run them, for friends and clients alike. So let's talk a little bit about the three personalities. As mentioned, most small businesses started by somebody who's great at doing the work of the business, the architect, the designer, the engineer, etc. This technician knows what to do and how to do it. They're generally pretty good. The entrepreneur thinks about their vision for the future, however, less about what they do today and more what the business initially should be called, what its mission is, what it could become, the change it wants to have, or the impact it wants to have on the world. However, this personality is often relegated because there's a lot of work to be done, especially in the early days where you may not have much of a team and you just need to do the work to make sure that you're keeping the revenue coming in to keep a roof over your head. And so that technician focus takes over. Then, every once in a while, reluctantly and often in response to a crisis, the manager personality emerges to bring some order to the chaos before they then retreat again. The manager is focused on the past most often, understanding what went right, what went wrong, and how to improve things. Now, this manager role often provides great insights and is often able to see what needs to change. However, that time and energy and focus is often destined to fail if all the manager is doing is managing people, is projecting those insights and those lessons into people, because people are creative but not consistent. They're resourceful but not reliable. And so if you're putting all of that time and energy as a manager into people and only people, then you're going to really suffer because you can't depend on that piece of the puzzle being reliable and predictable. So the first step to taking back control is to work on the business. And to do that, you need to prioritize the role and make time for the entrepreneur and the manager roles over the technician. Now, while this is partly a matter of time management and prioritization, there's often a bigger question, which is, well, how do I make that time useful? If I set aside half a day for the manager every single week, no matter what am I actually going to be doing with that time? How should I focus? How should I think about approaching this on the business concept? And the good news is there's actually a pretty good model, which is to think of your business as the product. Now, you might have seen the excellent 2016 film, The Founder, which profiles Ray Kroc and the rise of McDonald's. And while there's absolutely a lot of drama in the story, the key lessons from McDonald's success as they apply to any business was the focus on productizing the McDonald's business, not on the burgers, but on the process and the business itself. Prior to McDonald's, there were lots of these concepts of brand franchises. You can still see them today through things like a car dealership where they have a logo and they sell a particular product from a particular brand that they've acquired the rights to sell. But the way they run their business is totally up to them. And you'll often see it in car dealerships as well, because they'll have multiple different brands that they actually represent under one roof. But what happened with McDonald's was really the birth, if you will, of the business system franchise, which outlines how a business is run, not just what it sells. And that focus on how the business is run and productizing that unlocked the success of McDonald's and, frankly, hundreds of other franchises that have also emerged. Now, you might be thinking for a minute, look, I don't want to make hamburgers. I'm running a great business that is highly services driven and client focused. I don't want this thing to be cookie cutter. And the answer is that's fine. I'm glad to hear that. But the examples of what it takes to think about your business as the product and what it takes to really systemize so that you're able to do your best, most creative, most energizing work still apply, whether you're an architect or flipping burgers. Because if you want to build a business that doesn't depend on you, which allows you to take a vacation and to scale beyond your eyesight so that one day you may even be able to sell it to somebody else, you need to think about the business as the product. You need to think about what it takes to run that business without you being the sole person who needs to be there. Now, if you're going to do this, you need to stop working in the business and you need to work on the business. But you also need to work on the right thing. What should you be focusing on to help you, transition your business from being something that delivers great plans if you're an architect or great designs if you're a designer, and instead is actually the product that enables that process? And the answer is, thankfully, a really good approach, which is to focus on the systems that are most missing in businesses today. Because when it comes to working on the business, the most important place to focus is where you've frankly got your biggest gap. And for most businesses, that's their systems. In most businesses, people manage other people. So you'll have a manager in the business that manages a group of their team members or staff. And then those people go to work creating value for their clients. And there's a problem with this approach because it depends entirely on that blue band of people there to know exactly what they need to do to create value for clients. It depends on their individual attitude, their motivation, their skills. And as mentioned, people are inconsistent and unpredictable. Might depend on how much sleep they've had or the mood that they're in or what the last client said to them. And because people are creative but they're not consistent and they're resourceful but not reliable, you end up with a lot of chaos and frustration. And you often find that the manager gets dragged in to solve problems that are always reactive and always frustrating, which is part of the reason why it's impossible to scale or take a vacation. And eventually, what you'll find is a failed business or a broken manager or both, because they just don't have systems for their people to run. Conversely, in a successful business, the manager still manages people, but the people run, follow, or use a system to create value for their clients. This results in a business with less chaos and frustration and a lot more predictability. This business is scalable, it can grow because it doesn't depend only on hiring the most talented, unique individuals that walk the planet. Instead, you can bring people in who are still learning, who are maybe green or who are changing careers. And you can bring them in and plug them in to run a system and teach them how to do that in the same way that we all learn at some point how to drive a car. And so by taking people and applying their energy to run a system and having the system provide the direction and the consistency for value creation, you're able to then scale the business and not depend entirely on the knowledge and experience of the individuals in the business any given day. This focus on systems, this green bar, is honestly the number one thing for you to focus on when you're trying to productize your business. So when you're focusing on the business, this is the area you want to put your time and energy because it gives you something that will scale and it also gives you something that you can measure. The benefits of systems are immense. They make your business scalable. They make your business measurable. They make it so that your business can be improved iteratively, because there's one thing that's for sure is the first attempt at this won't be perfect because perfection is continually in the distance for all of us. They help you reduce your risk and the dependence on particular key people or a particular key piece of knowledge. They allow you, frankly, to take a vacation. They allow you to create value and wealth in the business. And frankly, if you've got systems and you're not having to manage chaos all the time, they make running a business fun again. Now, we've got a strong exposure and a lot of experience in this area because we actually built our entire company to be a system. Now, your system can be anything you want it to be. It can be a manual, a playbook, a series of checklists, anything you want that works. But what's most important is whatever it is, your people have to use it as they do their work. It can't be something which sits on the shelf collecting dust. In the E-Myth, they gave a great example of a hotel and how systemized they were. And their team used clipboards and checklists because when you're going through and cleaning a room or you're running a checkout process, you're doing that in a way that is very friendly to having a clipboard that hangs off the side of your cleaning trolley or is stuck next to the screen of your computer as you're completing a checkout process. But for a lot of service businesses, they're often harder to systemize because your people are your factory. Your people are the ones who create value for clients. That's true whether you're an architect, accountant, engineer, designer, or consultant. However, because no two clients or projects are identical, you need to instead focus on systemizing your workflow, the steps you complete to be able to deliver a great outcome and make sure that things don't get forgotten about. That way, you're able to get the benefits of scalability, consistency, and performance with a lot less chaos, confusion, and unpleasant surprises. And so by bringing your workflow engine or the tool that you use for tasks, as well as then projects, tickets, requests, any recurring work and invoices, by bringing them together and actually making the way that you do the work be part of how you then actually manage that workflow and those steps, enables you to make sure that the system that you're investing your time and energy in crafting and continuously improving is actually the way people do their work day to day. And that honestly is why we built Accelo, to be that system for managing all of your client work from quote to cash in one place and enabling you to do things that are fairly unique from a product perspective, like defining workflows, dependencies, rules, triggers, notifications, so that basically you and your team can benefit from a system that not only runs the business, but also is their backbone of how they do all their work every day. So in summary, only you can take back control. You have to want to take back control though. No one's going to make you do it. And it may well be that spending another couple of months on the metaphorical couch or kind of curled up in a defensive posture, waiting for things to pass, makes sense for you. And it's totally up to you to make that decision. However, I would encourage many of you who are listening to this episode to really think about what your business would need to look like in the next 3 to 6 months to take advantage of what's going to be a once in a generation economic boom and how you can benefit from that. And if this resonates, then I would encourage you to look at taking back control by focusing on your business, not in it. And if you would like some help and advice, we offer free 30-minute consultations. It doesn't take much time out of your day, where you can come along and share with us, hey, this is how we do what we do. This is what we've got in place right now. Is what you guys do over there at Accelo going to be useful for me? And so we're quite happy to do that, just so you can be a little bit more aware and a little bit more knowledgeable about the options you've got to be able to take back control and focus on instead of in the business. 2020 has been and continues to be about survival for most small businesses. However, it's important to remember that this too shall pass. And the most important thing that you can do to take advantage of tomorrow is to work on your business today. Thank you so much for joining this first episode of the On the Business webinar series. I'll now throw it open to some questions to see what folks have come through with while we've been covering this content.
Geoff, thank you for sharing with us today. We have a few questions from the audience that I'd like to pose to you. How would you recommend folks carve out time for the entrepreneur and manager personalities?
That's a great question. So the first thing to do is to set aside some time. And it's as simple as putting it in the calendar and having it as a recurring event so that other things don't get booked over the top of it. And then for you to be disciplined enough to keep it that way. For the entrepreneurial role, I'd recommend 2 things with the time you'd set aside. And I'd recommend probably half a day a week. Half a day a week is a good measure for this one. When you're setting aside that entrepreneurial time, I would recommend getting physically out of your working environment, getting out of the business, getting away from your technology as well. I mean, our smartphones are optimized to steal our attention. It's what they do, right? So recognize that and then keep them in a backpack or put them in a silent mode and put them in your pocket. But honestly, the temptation for all of us now, we've been so conditioned, is to get them out and check them constantly. So get away from the office, or if you're working from home, go for a walk around your neighborhood, get away from technology. And what you want to do is you want to be thinking about your clients. Think about what they need that you don't do or that you don't do well today. Think about other markets that you don't serve today. Think about the future. Remember, this is about where you want to take the business and where it can go, the opportunity that exists. So spend most of your time being very happy, content, and proud of doing some daydreaming and thinking about the future and what it could be. For the manager, I'd also recommend that half a day a week as a good time to set aside. And for most folks, instead of the dreamer, I would encourage you to try and be a bit more of a detective. So the manager personality really lives in the past. They're focused on understanding what has worked, what hasn't, and trying to understand why. Now, if you've got the data already, that's great. Spend time looking at key metrics like revenue per employee, profitability per client, project, and team, and really try and understand and spot those high and low performance areas, and then talk to your team to understand and discover the differences. Why did this project go badly? Why did this one go well? Why is this client's margin wonderful? Why is this client's margin bad? Why do all of our projects, all of our team in the design area take way longer than our team in the production area? What's the utilization difference? But if you don't have that data, then don't fret. It just means that before you get to be a detective and an analyst, you really need to go out and get the information. You need to get the evidence. So I'd start interviewing a team and asking them what went right and wrong. Even if you don't have the data to understand the quantity of right and wrong, your folks will have a feeling for it, and you probably will too. I'd also recommend in that manager persona to spend some time spend some time talking to your clients, surveying them to find out where you're delivering great value and where you're falling short. Probably lastly, I would recommend that you set aside these 2 half days to be on different days, because the mentality of the entrepreneur and the manager are really like oil and water, because your manager role is focused on problem solving and looking back, and your entrepreneur is more opportunistic dreamer mentality looking forward. So I would put them on different days and separate them out that way. Also, don't fall for the trap of saying, well, the entrepreneur stuff's a bit dreamy, and so therefore I'm just going to make it happen on Friday afternoon. Be honest with yourself about when you are your most cognitively productive and when you are maybe your most exhausted. And don't put this important entrepreneur or manager time into your exhausted bucket. Good question, though.
How should I start systemizing my business?
That's a great question as well. I'd recommend starting by going to a whiteboard. Honestly, don't go straight to a technology solution like Accelo. Go to a whiteboard first. There are thousands of successful businesses that started on this journey that didn't even have the internet, much less a fancy diagram software or learning management systems. So I'd recommend start simple, start at a whiteboard, get some ideas down, draw a flow of how you create value from that, very beginning to end of the process. Often being client-centric, I would recommend. Sure, there's a lot of stuff from a systems point of view about hiring and promotions and internally oriented things, but the area I would focus honestly is that outward-looking view towards what you do for your clients. I'd recommend that folks start high-level and simple. If your initial value creation system that you've outlined has more than 10 steps on your first cut, you're probably too deep in the weeds. So resist that temptation as much as you can to go deep in the weeds and try and keep it high level to start with. Then bring your people along for the ride. They'll be able to share a lot of great insights and perspectives, and there'll be things that'll surprise and possibly also appall you about what's really going on in the way that they do their jobs today for your clients. And then once you've got that high level understanding in place, but before you're too in love with it, I'd recommend that you then try and bring it to life. Remember, no plan survives contact with the enemy. And the same goes with your first, second, third, and 100th versions of your business plan, or your business system plan, I should say. So resist the urge to make it perfect. Don't spend a lot of time on design. Don't spend a lot of time on detail. Get it high level, and then set your team members' expectations as well. This is a journey of continuous improvement. And then whether it's a massive spreadsheet or a platform like Accelo, actually start using it on your very next client engagement. continually tuning and improving it with new workflows, checklists, templates, and reminders as you go.
No two clients or projects in our business are the same. We're not a factory or a fast food restaurant. Can you elaborate on how this could apply to our business?
Great question. When I was in school, I really wanted to be a pilot, and I almost joined the Navy to be a pilot, but I ended up choosing a last minute, ended up going to regular university, chose a different path. But I still love flying. And so a few years later, I went out and got my private pilot's license. Now, in all my time flying, there has never, ever, ever been an identical flight, even in the most basic training where you literally do circuits of the airfield on the same runway. Even no two circuits are ever identical. And it's for simple reasons, like weather is never the same. If you're going to a different destination, that makes it variable. The air traffic changes. No two flights are ever the same. And yet, safely piloting a plane requires an obsession with systems and a discipline to follow checklists and procedures. And so I think about systems for a service business in much the same way. If you're an agency, part of the value you create for your clients is by being creative yourself and coming up with novel campaigns and new perspectives. The same goes for any other service business. However, it doesn't mean that you don't have underlying procedures. Just like those pilots, no two clients are the same, no two projects are the same, but you still have a baseline of things that you need to do to make sure that you arrive safely to your destination. And so if you're running a service business, it might be procedures on how you engage a new client, the information you make sure you gather about them before you start working with them, the processes you have to make sure a quote's approved, to make sure that you're not going over budget or delivering substandard work because it hasn't had the right internal review. Now, just like flying, if you've got your systems in place, if you've got your checklists, then you actually make running the business a lot more fun and a lot less dangerous. And you can actually spend that time enjoying the view instead of just trying to survive.
I've heard people should start out by defining a detailed list of requirements before they look at solutions. Is this good advice?
Another great question. There's often, good advice about how to search out or select a technology solution, particularly one as important as a system to run your business. And a lot of that advice comes from the perspective of saying, okay, you need to have perfect knowledge and understanding of everything that you need in a really big, long requirements list, and then go out and just find something that fits the bill. However, in my decade of working with business owners on exactly this sort of a challenge, and adding to that my own decade of experience before that running a service business, the reality is that none of the people who are running a service business are experts in the sorts of technology that they're actually looking to implement. And so the advice about getting a perfect list and having perfect knowledge to then make the process low risk and really successful is coming really from a point of view of if you're a full-time analyst who's doing their 15th implementation of this project type of thing for Accenture, and you're just rolling out a familiar playbook. Honestly, for a lot of small business owners and service business owners, I highly recommend that they actually start with really just a sense that they want to improve their business and that vision of what they want their business to become, and then engage with a partner who they can learn from in the discovery and the buying process. Instead of going in with a big long checklist of, sort of 30 pages of all the things the system needs to do. Because frankly, if you're great at running a consulting business or an architecture business, you're probably not up to date with all of the opportunities you've got available to really, sort of put in technology. Instead, partner with somebody who's worked with thousands of businesses like yours, and then go in with your ears and your eyes open so that you can listen and learn, as opposed to having that fixed sense of your requirements. Because if you just go in with a set of requirements that are fixed, you may well find yourself selling yourself short, because you probably would have a much better list if you had a learning mindset and engaged with that open mind.
This brings us to the end of our first episode. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again for our next episode. Thank you.